Okay, we're back, and this time we're going to temporarily end our journey with QGIS with this last tutorial. We will get back to QGIS, but this is the setup for Blender GIS, and it involves 3D modeling of buildings and landscapes. And it's because there's a plugin that has just been released that you're familiar with the origins of. It's Cesium Ion, where we started the course. So there is a QGIS Cesium Ion plugin that you should install. And when you've installed that plugin, it will show up over here under Cesium Ion alongside the browser. And when you click on it, it's going to log you into your account, which you should already have, and you have to allow it to provide the metadata and the assets and the tokens. So say allow, and then it should get you into your account that you created at the beginning of the course. And then when you go back and you click on it, see that I have my bear and the salmon that I showed you. That's there, and the Melbourne photogrammetry that is part of Cesium's tutorial. Let's go back online and just make sure we refresh that so you know what it's talking about, what it makes available. Remember, we were in Cesium, we opened up Ion, and then we were working on our different geo stories. I had mine here, and when I click on it and I'm in my account, then I have assets that I can bring in, like the bear and the salmon here. And I should be able to, by the way, zoom in and see where I placed that asset that I showed. There it is, right at Rosebud, right? So, and it's on the planet, even though I'm at the, I'm on my first slide, and that's not where it's going to be found in the slide. So if I go off the slide and then come back in, I'll start at where I started. But anywhere you are in the middle of your thing, it doesn't matter. You can always go check your asset and then click on it, and it'll take you to where that asset is found. And mine is found at the Rosebud Continuum here. Right there. Right? So there's the bear. It's found there. Remember that when you go to learn, it tells you how to do Melbourne. We looked at that in class, and it's got all these assets for Melbourne they have you bring in so that you can do this real good urban planning with Melbourne's open data. So that's what the Melbourne is. And if you go to add asset and you bring in Melbourne, which should be, there's Melbourne photogrammetry. If you add that to your assets, there it is there, and then you go to that, well, it's going to take you all the way over to Melbourne, which is really cool, where they have a lot of great stuff. I mean, look at how detailed they've made the city of Melbourne so that you can do really good planning at various levels of detail. So Melbourne, yes, very, very cool as these levels of detail come in, stronger and stronger. If you turn that level off, then you get that. It's still good, but it doesn't have as much data as this highly, highly detailed overlay that they have provided for the city of Melbourne. Look at the differences, and there's more data in here. So, nice to have for the city of Melbourne. I have a swamp buggy that I did. I can turn Melbourne off now. I used my phone at the Disney Nature Wilderness Preserve, and I scanned this swamp buggy in, and I decided to bring it into the Disney Nature Preserve. There's where it was actually, oops, I need to get there again. This is in Orlando. This is where we were visiting with students, and that's where the swamp buggy was. So I dropped that swamp buggy in. Now it's, again, having some problems. I want to zoom in, I want to right zoom, and then click. And that's if I wanted to make a slide for it. And yeah, so what you do is if you have something in there, like I can put in, actually that shouldn't even be in this geo story. Let me leave this geo story and let me go to the Florida Wildlife Corridor, because that's where it was. And go to open that one. because your assets are good across different places. So here's the Nature Conservancy's Disney Reserve right there, and there's that swamp buggy because it's in my assets, but it'll go onto the map no matter what story I'm telling. If I choose to put it in because I created it and put it in, it'll be there. So you can adjust its location if you click on that, and then you can move it a little bit that way or that way. Your 3D assets can be put in, and I can rotate it, twist it around. Because it really was facing kind of like that so that the Girl Scouts could get on it. Translation, non-uniform scaling if I want to make it bigger or smaller. And I can move it like that or like that. Right, so there's the swamp buggy that I put in. Put it on the ground. I'll take it with my telephone. All right, so that's in there. You have heading, pitch, and roll, latitude and longitude. You can drop in positions, and then you save it. All right, so that's pretty cool. And there's terrain, which is the realistic photo 3D tiles that we're using to get those other buildings in. So with that, whenever you see these different assets, you can see that if I'm in QGIS now, I have my bear and salmon, I've got my Cesium OSM buildings, my Google photorealistic tiles. That's really what I want to put in. I don't need to put in the swamp buggy or anything into my GIS map. I do want the Google photorealistic tiles in my project. Now for Morocco, they're not going to show up much because there isn't anything for Morocco. But if I go to, in plugins, if I go to geocoding and I go to Melbourne, Australia, that's Melbourne. I don't have the Google satellite map on, so you're not going to see anything in there because I took that out. It looks like, no, there's Google satellite. So there's Melbourne, but it doesn't have any other information. So from Cesium, I can drag Cesium ion. Oops, I can drag. Let me close it like that. Drag Cesium ion into my work and use an existing default token, and it should work. It keeps saying it wants to add assets to the map. Well, there's the OSM building. So for each of those areas, it wants to know if I want to bring in a different thing. So I can bring in the default token for that. There's the bear and the salmon. Each of my layers are going to come in. And then when I go to, I'll go to the bear and the salmon. It'll take me to Rosebud, obviously. And you have to wait for it and 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 wait for it. So I'm going to put you on pause because Google 3D photorealistic tiles are a bear, to make the joke. So it did bring me into Rosebud. The bear doesn't show up because it's a two-dimensional map, but that's where the bear was placed. Cesium buildings are all over the planet, so we don't really need those. But photorealistic tiles are there, and you should see, if I turn off Google Satellite, then things continue to persist because this is not Google Satellite anymore. This is Google photorealistic tiles. But they take up a lot more memory. And there are 3D buildings in here, and you'd never see them unless you go to a place like Melbourne. And let's go to Melbourne again. And say, okay, you have the whole world at your fingertips. And then wait, and wait, and wait. Because I'm only using Google photorealistic tiles. I'm not using the Google Satellite. I could turn on Google Satellite. It's very quick, but then I turn it off, and you have nothing yet until Google Photorealistic Tiles loads. But there's Melbourne. I can zoom out a bit and look at the city in a different regard. There's the whole city there. And see if the realistic tiles are ever going to come in. There they go. Now they came in, as you can see. Boom, boom. But how do you know that there's anything 3D in there? How would you know? So the first thing you can do to check if there's something 3D in here, what you would do is you would click on the layer of photorealistic tiles and go to symbology and turn it from textured to wireframe and apply it. Well, that didn't do much, so maybe I don't want to do that. Let me try that again. Let me go back to textured, but let me, oh, it's taking so long to do. So this is the huge problem with this. That should have worked, but it's taking a long time. So I've got some instructions that I learned from a tutorial that you should follow in the tutorial. And what it is, it's the setup, because these data sets can be huge. So what we want to do is add a 0 in network in setup options. So go to, close this, go to setting, select options, and look for network, and add a 0 here under cache settings, and say OK. That's one thing that's necessary to do. The other thing, setup options, so that's what we did, right? We went to, it's still taking its sweet time to pull all that information in. So it can be a real pain, but it's going to happen. You will see. And it's making my system not respond. Hit pause. All right, it seems to have worked now, and I'm going to double click on this and go from textured to wireframe, and apply, and hope. Okay, so you see how now you can tell that there are 3D wire meshes in there. That's what you're seeing. If I use the texture colors and apply, give it a chance to render, and wait for it, and wait for it. Now you see the actual textures for the map. And we're looking at this, which takes so long to do, which is why we're going to move out of QGIS for this work and get into BlenderGS. But you can see now that there's the map, and I can move around the map knowing that there are 3D models here that can be looked at. There's that river. And we should be able to get in here the Melbourne photogrammetry as well. That's probably really going to bog us down, but we'll put it in and see if that makes any difference. So there's the Melbourne photogrammetry. If I turn on, yeah, there it is, coming in. So if I turn off Google Photorealistic Tiles, Melbourne's photogrammetry is there, but it's only that section, only those tiles, whereas the Google Photorealistic Tiles underneath it will be the entire planet. Boom, 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 boom.
Mommy, magnets are
But
made
that
out
means that if I'm anywhere else in the world,
Why are magnets made out of metal?
I want to zoom in on Melbourne, I can just zoom to that layer and wait for it to come in, and that's much more highly detailed. And if I turn off this and just look at Melbourne, I can do the same thing with the symbology. Check if it is 3D by going to wireframe and apply, and you can see, yeah, it sure is. All those polygons are in there. And you can see them textured. So, and this will be textured. No, use texture colors, but keep it wireframe. Right. That is the three-dimensional topography that is in there. If you then go to View and go to 3D Map Views, you might be able to get some interesting information there. There it is. There it comes in. So this is that data set. Okay, hold on a second. So this is cool. It says a map layer is used all graphics memory allowed. You may want to lower the amount of detail in the scene or increase the limit in the options because this really uses a lot of memory, as you can see. And look at how it's causing memory problems. So that if I wanted to go and do an animation, by setting the animation, I probably would have some problems. I could set a keyframe there, and I could go all the way to the end. There's already a keyframe at the given time. No? So I could go to the end, and if I take my image, I can take my image, try to rotate it around. I'm not sure that I can. Yeah, that's great. Ooh, it's so hard to do. So turning this around.
How many you are using?
And then
No,
setting this as a keyframe.
9.
There's not a lot of that.
9.
At 5.
Not a lot.
It says there is a keyframe at that time. So I don't know. If we hit this, yeah, then we get this animation, and it kind of blinks because it is using a lot of memory. And I did want to turn this around. I wanted to go toward the river.
You don't need to open two
And then you have to wait for it to upload. You can see it's really getting messed up because we don't have, in the options, we don't have enough memory there. But if I add a keyframe there and hit loop, it should be, yeah, it's trying very hard within its memory limitations to play that animation. So that's using the View 3D Map Views. If we try to use QGIS to 3JS plugin, it says it's in the wrong projection. So you would have to change this to, I guess, the right projection. And I'm not sure. This whole projection thing can be such a pain. But now let's see if that works. Current GQ, remove that. GIS elevation tile. It's in there. There it is. And it's not, doesn't have a DEM to work with. So it's not really ideal for using that, although let's see if we go back to the layer and we look at it not as wireframe but as textured and apply that, and then go in here. Buildings aren't showing up because it doesn't have a DEM under it, and this is made for DEMs. So we're not going to get the 3D view on this that we like. And so there's all sorts of, limitations and things. Cesium is built for Cesium, but it does come in here, and you can put in the photorealistic tiles, for example, and let's go back to them. Let's get rid of Melbourne itself as a photogrammetry, and let's turn this back into a textured, and hit apply. And in here, if we zoom in and let Google Photorealistic Tile do what it wants. If we then go to the 3D map view and make a new 3D map view, it probably is going to be too memory intensive for this. Even if we do flat terrain, we don't have a DEM to use. Mesh might work, but you'd have to have an elevation, and we don't have one. So we're seeing limitations for that entire Google 3D tile data set. If we go back to QGIS to 3GS and we look at that, we also don't have, there it came in finally, no, it doesn't come in, there it is, now it's back in, and you don't have any elevation information. There are elevation tiles, and let's see if it builds those. Turn off the flat plane. And we're not getting elevation tile information. So there are limitations then working with Cesium in this. One of the things I do talk about in terms of setup is that we should do some other setup in here. And so I'm suggesting that besides adding a 0, we should be able to increase some of the settings for getting more memory apportioned to this. And there is a guy who showed how to do that without eating up all the memory, but it's difficult because it uses up all the memory. But yeah, you want to have that capability, and it does let you, if you're here, it will let you, if you go to view, ultimately if you get rid of these other map views and remove them so they're not taking up memory, and let this come out so it's not taking up memory. And then let's see if we then view a 3D map view. And we just have to wait for it. So one of the reasons that we're having so much trouble with the memory is because while we added in the settings and we went to options and we added that cache size in the network, it actually got even smaller. So, but one of the things that we didn't do is we didn't set the project extent. So it's trying to do the whole world, and we just want it to be whatever map we're on. So if you go to the project and you go to properties and then you go to the view settings, you can set project full extent current and then use the map canvas extent to set it so it doesn't try to do more than that. And now you've limited what you're asking it to do, so that when you go up to show the 3D map, which should be, there's a button for this somewhere, so you don't always have to go to view and then 3D map. It looks like this. See, it's got a little 3D sign on it, so it's right actually here. So new 3D map view, new map view. So if you go to the 3D map view, which you can find in this icon there, now it's going to show up because we set a limit to it. Now if we push forward, now we got all that 3D stuff, and we're not going to run out of the caching size. So that is much better. And while this is not going to work in QGIS to 3JS, its own map viewer will be sufficient for setting these, although it says here again it's used all the graphics. Let me increase the limit in the options. So we would do better off if we would set in the options the cache limit size, and let's make this something ridiculous like, I don't know, like 1 million, and see what that does. Okay. Yeah. And then when we go to do our animations, we can set a keyframe here. It's going to tell us there's already one. Oh, it still says it's using up all the memory. But we should have a better ability to get through here and zoom to something else like that if we want. Although now it's blank. I might maybe zoom in on that college. Tilt a little bit more. Oops, and it's stopped drawing. So it's a very frustrating thing. Just wanted to show you that it does work, but it is frustrating because of the memory stuff. And so we don't often use that here. This is still spinning and spinning and spinning as it tries to calculate stuff. There it comes again. Well, there you go. There. So there's the map. All right, let's set a keyframe for that. And then do an animation, and it zooms in. Hey, hooray. All right, but because we are now on 3D map and we're using Google photorealistic tiles, not Melbourne photogrammetry, which is its own other layer that we looked at before, which can be put on top of that, as you can see. If it comes in, right? There it is. There it's coming in, the photogrammetry. But we're coming outside of Melbourne. There's the photogrammetry layer, and there's all of Melbourne. Because now if we leave Google photogrammetry, I'm sorry, Melbourne photogrammetry, but we go instead to Tampa, and let that build up, knowing that it's here if I click on that, and then I can zoom in using Google Maps to an area that I want to zoom in on. All right. So if I decide this is the area that I want to look at in Tampa, and then go back to Google Photorealistic Maps, turn off Google Satellite. Okay, the thing is loaded. Now when I go to the 3D, whether I go to view, again, memory. All right, here it comes, building up. Okay. So this is the Google Photorealistic 3D tiles, letting it build up. And now if I go to to view and go to 3D map views, or simply click on this icon here and give it time to process, then eventually we should see this part of Tampa show up. Like I said, it just takes a hot second. Let's wait for it. But let's also remember that we have a different map extent. We were using project settings, and we went to properties, and we set the map extent to Melbourne. So now we'd have to use this map extent and apply it. And then we've restricted what we want there. And then when we go to the 3D view, then it comes up. All right, so There we go.
Wait, just a
So now we have
just 5 feet on this.
Tampa that we can look at. We just have to wait for it all to come in. And if we want a larger map extent, then we have to go and change the map extent because we only used this one piece. So we'd have to come out here and say, well, I want more of Tampa, and go to Project Settings, Properties, change the map canvas extent, and apply it. Say OK. Then go back to your 3D view and wait for the thing to draw. There's the map extent that we have. There's the whole map of everything. And so you can see the 3D buildings are beginning to come in, but they're taking their sweet time because it's so memory intense. So you can say, well, it isn't so fun to have to deal with all that. So better off if you're doing storytelling to use Cesium itself natively, and otherwise we would go into a true 3D program like Blender, which is what we're going to do next. So this is all just showing you that yes, Cesium does play with QGIS, and it does play with its 3D viewer, and it loads all these tiles, and it just takes a lot longer to do. All right. So with that, we are sort of going to put a pause on QGIS as a program. And instead, we're going to work with, maybe I just wanted to see one other thing. If I scene settings, the Z exaggeration, I don't know if that does anything in this, but I'm going to see. I don't think it's going to make a darn bit of difference because there isn't any DEM information in there. And I don't think if you add a layer, yeah, it's not, the Cesium stuff doesn't play with QGIS to 3JS. That uses DEM layers in order to do this. I guess the last thing I did want to check is the export functions, because we know that QGIS to 3JS is really good at sending this stuff and sending models out to the web, because you can always export. But since there's no topographical information here, it doesn't help us, whereas if you go to the 3D map view and do that, I don't know as we have, it's like now it's dropping out the layer extent from there. So there's all sorts of weird things that these programs do. Let's go back to Project, Properties, and use the canvas extent from here. Now let's go look at the map. Yeah, it's like it's taking that entire area and doing strange things with it. Whereas if I turn that off, if I go to the project settings and say not to set the full project extent, and then go and look, and it just takes forever to load.
I'm back, Daddy.
I see that. And this one doesn't seem to have any, there it is, it sort of showed up a second ago and then it got really funky.
Daddy,
Yeah,
I brought a grape.
thank you for bringing the grape. Camera, lights, advanced, and dock the view, export. Oh, you can export a 3D scene, and you can export an image. So if you did 3D scene, then it would export, but it doesn't tell us what format it uses. So it's not as useful. So yeah, let's just call this, you know, a An interesting excursion that what really you would use to do 3D landscapes is not QGIS. We need to go from QGIS to something that is made for 3D, and that would be Blender and Blender GIS, and that's what we'll get to next. All right? Happy experimenting.